No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Yeah.
You see, I grew up in America. I grew up in the land where phrases like, I have a dream, meant something. I grew up where I believed that freedom existed, that that's what I was fighting for, that our founding fathers made America the land of the free and the land of the brave. This is America, damn it, and I'm taking it back.
And now your host, Terry Joyce.
Welcome back to the Freedom of Joy show here on American Freedom Radio for the second hour here. And before we go on, I just do want to give a station shout out to American Freedom Radio, and please do consider offering us a donation here at the site to keep us going here and broadcasting at this time and getting this information out to you. Also, if you'd like to support my efforts with Freedom of Joyce Media, I'm at freedomofjoyce.net. I've got a little donate button there as well. And I want to give a shout out to a couple of my friends and some promotions that I do have here with them. One is permaclonecollars.com. Check them out. They are great for your cloning needs right now with your medical marijuana clones or your recreational marijuana clones, depending on what state you're in. These collars are sterilizable, reusable for up to 5 years, which is a wonderful new industry standard because the current ones only last a couple uses. So do check them out at permaclone.collars. There is a special, which is a discount and free shipping, and you do need to use the code FOJ420, so do take a moment to do that as well. And also check out my friends at hermeticbotanicals.com. There's all kinds of lotions and oils made out of cannabis, as well as the Focus Gummy Bears, which has CBD and certain properties in it that help rewire the neural pathways of the brain, and we know how great and necessary that is. There is a 10% discount, and the passcode to that is FOJJOY. All right, right now I would like to get on with the show here for the next hour. My guest today is from LEAP, which is the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. He is not only just part of LEAP, but he is the co-founder of LEAP. As a matter of fact, even the idea of LEAP came from this man. And I'd like to welcome him to the show the first time here on the Freedom of Joy show, but not the first time that he's been on American Freedom Radio. But I'd like to welcome Peter Christ. Thank you for being here today, Peter.
Terry, thank you for sharing your audience with me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. And, first of all, what made you, what caused you to think about, what caused you to care about prohibition and, conceptualize, LEAP?
Well, it was my mommy and daddy. Both of my parents I was born in 1946. Both of my parents were born in 1904. So they were 16 years old when alcohol prohibition started in the United States in 1920. And they were 29 years old, whatever, when prohibition ended in 33. My sister had already been born by then. And when I was born in 46, in the late 50s, a television program came on called The Untouchables, and it was about Chicago and Al Capone and Prohibition. And I had two people sitting there watching that program with me who lived through Prohibition. They were, the whole period. They were teenagers when it started. They were adults and married and going on with their life when it ended. And they grew up in Buffalo, New York, on the Canadian border. Okay, give you a quick example of one of the things that came up in the discussion. My grandfather, my father's brother, my great uncle Walter, who I knew as being the ace mechanic who ran the garage for the Seal Test Ice Cream Company. I learned after we started talking about Prohibition that between 1920 and 1933, my uncle Walter owned a boat. And he used to get in that boat from time to time and go across a river called the Niagara to a place called Canada who did not have a prohibition, and he would fill that boat up with Canadian whiskey, and then he would bring it back and supplement his income by selling it. Now, during that period, he was considered a gangster. I mean, that's what they defined, though, just like we do today with the drug dealers. They're all gangsters. Well, when alcohol prohibition ended, he didn't go out and start robbing banks because he was a gangster. He went back and he started fixing the trucks at the Sealtest Ice Cream Company again because he was an honest guy who took an opportunity to make some money. He wasn't a gangster. And the failure wasn't the fact that my Uncle Walter supplied booze to people that wanted. The failure was that our government thought it could prohibit it and that the people would follow the prohibition. Those discussions started me looking at this issue in a different way. And by the time I was about 16, 17 years old, I saw the parallel between what we did then with alcohol and what we are doing currently with drugs. Now, this is before, you have to understand, this is before Nixon kicked off the drug war in 72. We're talking about the early 60s here. But there were still drugs, and there was still, you'd watch Dragnet, they'd make drug arrests, stuff like that. And I thought, gee, if one was stupid, in fact, it's funny, I would ask my mother, who was a wonderful Baptist lady, I would ask her, why didn't it work? And she would say, because the people didn't support it. Okay. I would ask my father, the term of the time was the fallen Catholic, why didn't it work? And he would say it didn't work because it was a stupid idea when they thought of it. Well, by the time I was about 20, the fact that we had passed a constitutional amendment to start alcohol prohibition kind of weakened my mother's argument because it took a lot of support to pass a constitutional amendment. But the fact is that my father appeared to be more right. I always tell people, if you want to know the definition of the word hypocrite, look it up in a dictionary, and you'll find a picture of me there. Because I came to this conclusion when I was 20, 21 years old that this drug war was stupid, that treating people like this was wrong, that this was fundamentally a healthcare and an educational problem. It should not be a criminal justice problem. And then what did I do? I got on the police department at the age of 22. Now, that's why I accuse myself of hypocrisy. Just so everybody understands why I became a cop. I became a cop because I wanted to save the world from all the evil people. No, that's a lie. I became a cop because it was a 20-year retirement, and it wasn't the United States Navy, which is the first place I went looking for a 20-year retirement. Now, since I mentioned the Navy and the 60s, I have to point this out just so we're clear. I am a Vietnam-era veteran. I am not a Vietnam War veteran. I was in the service during the period of the war, but I was never in Vietnam. That was the first place I went looking for a 20-year retirement. I didn't think I wanted to work for those people for 20 years. I came back to New York State. I could either be a firefighter or a police officer. I'm not mechanical, so firefighter was kind of off the list. And as a little introduction said about BS, police work is 90% BS. It's talking to people. It's solving problems, getting stuff straightened out. And I figured I was pretty good at that, so I started taking the exams, and I started I got on the job at the age of 22 as a rookie patrol officer. The day before I took the oath, I had a little sit-down with myself, and I said, you think this drug policy is stupid, but now it's going to be your job to enforce it, and everything you know about it is theory, right? I mean, all I knew was what I read and stuff like that. I had never worked in. But now I'm going to be in the business. I said, put all your old thinking on the back burner and give this a fair shot. By the time I was on the job about 4 years, I realized that I was right before I walked in the door. And the reason was drug enforcement was the only aspect of our job that no matter how vigorously we did it, it didn't make any difference. And what I mean by that is this. We would have a series of home burglaries in our community, and one of our officers would catch the burglar. And for a while, not forever, but for a while, the burglaries would stop. And we would take credit for that. We would say we took that bad person out of the community, and we made our community better. The only thing that changed when we made drug arrests was the faces of the people we arrested. There was never a shortage of drugs on the street. There was never any problem with people getting drugs. And it did simply meant that we were not accomplishing anything. And here's the other part of it. Because I worked there was 85,000 people working in the township that I was on the police department in, and it was a very white community, suburb of the city of Buffalo. And there was a lot of drugs in that community, okay? There weren't many black people in that community, but there were a lot of drugs in that community. And like I said, no matter how many people we arrested, nothing changed but the faces. And look at the lives we destroyed. Secondly, because people had this other little thing going on in their background, when we would go out to investigate real crimes, burglaries, robbery, rapes, people didn't want to talk to us. Not because they didn't want the crime solved, but because they were afraid that we'd smell something or see something or do something and they'd get arrested. And it put a wedge between us and the people we worked with. I saw this for 15 years. During that 15 years, I got promoted to lieutenant, spent 2 years as lieutenant, got promoted to captain, spent 3 years as captain, had a very successful career. When I retired, I said, I'm going to get into this anti-prohibition. And by the way, if you notice, I didn't say drug prohibition, this anti-prohibition movement. And I have to do this because I know what harm we are doing. And that's what happened in 1989. When I retired, I started doing drug policy stuff and prohibition stuff. And here I am now. Does that give a little background of where I got to?
It does, and thank you so much for taking us there. I appreciate it. I'm always curious about how people get involved in what they're doing and how they create things, because LEAP is very prominent now. I've been aware of LEAP for quite a while, and one of the things that the first time I really took notice of LEAP was when we were trying to legalize marijuana for recreational use back in 2010. I was behind that at the time, and I went to a Democratic debate about marijuana, and one of the organizations that spoke what was LEAP, and I found that what they had to say was interesting, and I think a lot of people don't really realize that there's a portion of police officers or lawmakers or retired lawmakers, police officers that actually get it, and they are against the arrests that are being made. When you mentioned, I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier. You mentioned not just drug prohibition, but all prohibition. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, certainly. There are two types of laws in society. The Latins had a phrase for it. It's an old phrase. The one type of law is mala, which means bad, in se, which means on sight. And that is laws like burglary, robbery, rape, where there's a victim, somebody assaults somebody else, somebody does harm, somebody's complaining, give me justice, I want justice. That's mala in se crimes. Then we have this other class of crimes, and they are called in the Latin term mala, which means bad, prohibita. Interesting word, is the prohibita? It's the root word of the word prohibition. Okay? Uh-huh. Mala prohibitum crimes are things that are illegal because we make them illegal, not because there's a victim. In most cases, mala prohibitum crimes are morality policing. They are acts between consenting adults who choose to do this behavior together, and the rest of us don't think they should do it, so we decide making it criminal will make them stop. Well, let me tell you something I have observed from reading history. When you got a bunch of people in society that want to do something and you make it against the law, the vast majority of them don't stop. Secondly, as soon as you make it against the law, you lose all your ability to regulate and control the activity. For instance, setting age limits or distribution points or whatever, purity if it's drugs, whatever. And then the third thing is the most interesting, and that is when you make this type of activity illegal, the people in it, if there's money involved, have no access to the court system to settle their money disputes, so they do it on the street. So you don't stop it, you lose all ability to regulate and control it, and you get more violence in your society. That is what you accomplish when you use mala prohibitum laws. And we see that throughout our history. There used to be an enterprise in this country that was run by gangsters. They employed 12 and 13-year-old children to do this illegal activity, and it was called the numbers racket. It was in every major city in America, and what it was you would spend a nickel, dime, or quarter, or a dollar, and you would pick a number, and then there would be a drawing, and whoever won the number would get the money. Okay, sound familiar?
Yeah.
We chased that for decades, trying to eliminate it, because we knew gambling was bad and it was wrong. All over the country we went after people, and we couldn't stop it. And then one morning we woke up, and the mob shut the whole thing down all by themselves. And the reason they shut it down was we started something called the lottery. Now, that didn't solve the gambling problem, okay? There are still people out there that are dumb enough to blow their whole paycheck on a lottery to whatever. That problem still exists. But we don't have 12 and 13-year-old kids running numbers for the mob anymore. We don't have the gangsters collecting the profits from this activity anymore. We accept the reality that people wanted to do this, and we decided that if it's going to exist in our society, it should exist in a regulated and controlled marketplace. So we legalized it. Okay? The reason we ended alcohol prohibition is not because we decided that alcohol was really okay. We ended alcohol prohibition because we realized this huge increase in violence we saw wasn't due to drugs. In fact, it's interesting, the terms we used. You hear about drug-related shootings all the time, right?
Yes.
Okay. There was an incident that happened on February 14th, 1929 in Chicago. It's known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 people mowed down in a garage, okay? I checked every article I could find from that period. Not one reporter reported that as an alcohol-related shooting. They all called it a prohibition-related shooting, because they realized that alcohol wasn't at the root of that problem. The policy of prohibition was. And maybe if our reporters would start reporting these as, instead of drug-related shootings, we would start reporting them as drug prohibition-related shootings, maybe our dialogue would change. In fact, I've done this throughout the years. I'll read an article and some reporter will say, drug-related shooting at the whatever. And I'll call the reporter up. And anytime you call a reporter up, you always start this way. Hey, I read your article on that shooting at the corner so-and-so. Very good. That's the way you start. And then I say to them, what information do you have that told you that either the victim or the perpetrator was high on drugs at the time? And every time I have done that, I have gotten the same answer. Well, we don't have that information. Then I say, well, if it's a drug-related shooting, that means somebody was high on drugs. How about it being a prohibition? And then they hang up on me usually because they don't want to talk about that. But that's the argument that we are not having in this country. That is the discussion we are not having in this country. Ehrlichman, one of Nixon's top aides, just came out about a week ago, and he said that the drug war, the big push for the drug war that Nixon started in 1972, the reason Nixon did it was to go after blacks and hippie drug users in the peace movement. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, that's the thing that we miss, because all of these morality laws are never about the thing being prohibited. They are about the people that do the thing being prohibited. And if you want, I can give you a little history on alcohol prohibition that most people don't know about.
I would love to hear it.
Okay. Most of us think that we started alcohol prohibition because alcohol is a dangerous drug, and people said that people, they'd beat up husbands, they'd beat up their wives and the kids, and that the drugs are terrible, alcohol's terrible. That wasn't why we started alcohol prohibition. What started alcohol prohibition in America was a movement that started around the 1860s, and it's known as either the Great Enlightenment or the New Reformation. And it was a series of meetings and tent meetings and church meetings all across America, and they were all Protestants that were involved in this activity. And there was two groups of people those Protestants didn't like, and they were called Catholics. Let's remember, John Kennedy was our first Catholic president and our only Catholic president. Okay, so a lot of that stuff still exists. But they didn't like Catholics, and they didn't like Jews. And pouring into the Ellis Island at the beginning of the 20th century were Italian and Irish Catholics and Jews from Eastern and Western Europe. And the Protestants didn't like that. But they couldn't make a law against them because it's a religion, and you can't do that. The Constitution says that's wrong. But you know what you can do? You can make a law against their drug of choice. And the Protestants determined that was alcohol. And that was the motivation for alcohol prohibition. And if you think that I'm way off base on this, my mother, who was born in 1904, I remember her telling me that the Buffalo newspapers would have help wanted ads in it, and it would say man needed to do work, whatever, and the last line of the ad would say, Catholics need not apply. So they couldn't get jobs in the regular community, but they still had families to take care of, so what did they do? They went into the illegal activity, and by the way, they sold a lot of that booze to Protestants. And that was it wasn't the motivation about alcohol, it was the motivation to get those people we don't like. And we've come a long way with this stuff. I mean, this nation's been through slavery, then we've been through that post-slavery period that lasted until almost 1954, when we said separate but equal. That isn't equality. That isn't America, separate but equal. But we did it until 1954, till Brown versus Board of Education. We have a lot of problems that we haven't even faced in this country. I'll give you a perfect example of how people forget stuff so quickly. Until the year 2000, it was illegal to be gay in New York State. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't mean it was just illegal, but it was actually a crime. It was a Class B misdemeanor. And the law that it was enforced under was a law called the Consensual Sodomy Law. And it said that sodomy between consenting adults was perfectly legal as long as they were married to each other. And of course, gay people couldn't be married to each other, so every time they had sex, they were committing a crime. Now, does that sound like America to you? But that was America. And we took decades to change that. Look at what we did with women's rights. We finally got the right to vote in 1920, and then we didn't hear a word about women's rights until the late 1960s. Let me tell you a quick story that happened to me. This is a little bit off base, but I think it's right on point.
Okay.
I came into work, I probably had about 6 months left on the job. I came to work as a duty captain. In my box, there was a note, go see the chief. It's for a 4 to 12 shift. I go up to the chief's office. He hands me a letter that invited him to something at the local high school. And he ain't going, but I got to go and show the badge. Okay? So we get the guy sent out on the road, and I'm driving around in the car, and about 7 o'clock I go over to the high school, and I walk in the high school, and I start doing what I'm supposed to do, talking to people and doing the stuff I got to do. And I get into a conversation with, and I prefer this term because there's nothing pejorative about it. I got into a conversation with a very high melanin content woman. Now, if anybody doesn't know what melanin is, it is the thing in your blood that makes your skin darker, okay?
Uh-huh.
So, I'm in this conversation with her, and in the midst of the conversation, I said something to her, I forget what, And it caused her to look me square in the eye and say, well, that's a sexist statement. And I said to her what I always said before I met her, and that was, no, you misunderstood me. I'm not sexist. Da, 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 da. And she looked me, remember, I'm standing there in front of her in uniform. She looks me square in the eye and she says this, let me tell you something. You are a white male in a white male privileged society. You can't help but be sexist and racist, and I suggest you get yourself into recovery as soon as possible. And I thought, the first thing I thought was how cool that she feels free enough to say that to me, right? And I looked at her, I said, I said, you don't know me. You don't, you know, I was a little insulted. And I walked away. And I'm thinking about it. Who the hell is she to tell me? Then I thought how cool it was that she had the nerve to stand there and tell the cop that, right? And it wouldn't go away. It kept bugging me. Now, I told you this wonderful career story, right? Rookie patrol officer, retired as a captain, I did it, man. I got that. Let's go back to 1967. When I took the patrol man's exam that women were not allowed to take. So now let's start this wonderful story of my career by saying, after having more than 50% of my competition eliminated for me, I went on and had this wonderful, successful career. Doesn't sound quite as impressive, does it?
No.
And I realized that woman was right, that there is such a subtlety to privilege that when you have it, you think it's just a right. And you don't understand that if other people are denied it, it's no longer a right. It's a privilege. Something Donald Trump ought to learn, by the way. But that started a big change in my life in the way I looked at myself. And I am a racist recovery, and it's going pretty good. You know, and the thing that had stopped me from that woman is if anybody ever says to me that I say something sexist or racist, I no longer dismiss it. My response is, why? And when they explain it to me, I usually end up by saying, you're right, I'm sorry, I'll never say that again, thank you. You know, because I don't want to act like that. But we have lost sight of that. I don't think we see it in ourselves in this society. And we don't see the lives. We are destroying more lives with this drug policy than the drugs would do if you gave them away free on street corners. Okay? Because first off, if you gave away free on street corners, the vast majority of us wouldn't take them. Just like the majority of people don't drink alcohol. And the other thing about this thing, and this just popped into my head real quick, I just want to throw it out there. Look at the unbelievable success we have had with changing our smoking habits in this country. When I was a kid growing up, you walked into a building and lit a cigarette, and then you asked for an ashtray if there wasn't one available. You never asked if you could smoke.
I know. Things have changed, haven't they?
Yep. Well, I can remember getting on a plane in New York City and flying all the way to L.A. in the smoking section, which was separated from the rest of the plane by a curtain.
Yes, I know. Isn't that silly?
Oh, yeah, it was absurd. But then look at what we did. We changed it. And we didn't make it illegal. We didn't make it against the law. We just stopped condoning it and saying, no, if you want to do that, you have to go outside, you know, And we've got 50% of the adult smokers have quit. That's a wonderful success story. And we did it without banning one cigarette. And at the same time we were doing that, we see an increase in heroin use, an increase in methamphetamine use. Doesn't anybody but me look at this? Don't they say, wait a minute, this just simply is a bad policy. The reason we ended slavery isn't because we didn't do it right. It's because it was a bad policy. The reason women are getting equality in this society isn't because we didn't mistreat them properly, because we certainly did, but because it was a bad policy. We needed to change the fundamental policy. We need to get law enforcement out of morality policing. We need to let law enforcement be what it says on the side of the LAPD car. I still think it says that. Protect and serve. Okay? Now, you give a soldier a job to go to war, and you tell him his job is to go out and protect and serve the enemy, he's going to think you're out of your mind. But yet, we are telling people we're at war over the drugs, which are supposed to protect and serve the people. We are sending the wrong message. I came on the police department in 1969. And when I came on the department, I was told by senior officers that the strangest thing about this job is that every time you arrest somebody, you're arresting your boss. Why? Because you work for the people. Now, the people are the enemy. And we're seeing what happens when you send people into the street with guns and you tell them that everybody out there is the enemy. And we shouldn't be shocked that we put people in this position and they act the way they do. That shouldn't surprise us. We should know better than this. Just like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam shouldn't have surprised us. And what we're doing is, first off, it's not accomplishing what they say we're supposed to accomplish. Drug use is up everywhere, okay? So it's not doing that. Secondly, it's causing more crime and violence in our society. It needs to be addressed. I'll give you a quick statistic. 1919, there was a homicide rate in America. 1920, we started alcohol prohibition. By 22, the homicide rate started going up. And it climbed just about every year during Prohibition. Went up a little bit, more homicides. It peaked in 1933, the year we ended alcohol prohibition. And by 1937, the homicide rate in America was back down to the level it was in 1919. And I want to mention two things about 1937. One is, it was the deepest, darkest period of the Great Depression. Some areas of this country had 30, 40% unemployment rate. There were a lot of angry people out there. And the other thing about 1937, it was 4 years after alcohol prohibition ended. And once we ended the prohibition, the homicide rate went down. And we saw it bounce along pretty normally, up a little bit, down a little bit, until 1972, when Nixon kicked off the drug war. And guess what? It started going up again. This should tell us something about what we're doing and about the responsibility that we have for the policies and the choices we make as citizens. I believe in liberty. In fact, I got two words that I have my own personal definition for. The first one is the word fascist. And before I tell you my definition of the word fascist, I always have to preface it by saying this. I had a very good friend that I worked with on the police department for a long time, and he used to say that there's only two kinds of people in the world. The kind of people that think there's only two kinds of people in the world, and the kind of people that are smarter than that. So, understanding that, I am going to say there are two kinds of people in the world. There's the normal people, and then there's the fascists. And here's how I tell the difference between the two. When a normal person has a great new idea, what the normal person does is actualize it. If other people admire it, they share it with them. Now, I'm a capitalist. They may share it for a profit, okay? But upon request, they share it with other people. When a fascist has a great new idea, the next thought that comes into the fascist's head is, this is such a good idea, we ought to make everybody do it this way. And you can be a fascist anything. You can be a fascist Republican, Democrat, Green Party, normal. You can be a fascist anything, as long as you think you got the right to tell other people what to do. And my other word, my favorite word, is the word liberty. And I define liberty as the right to be as stupid as you choose to be, as long as you do not harm another person or another person's property. Now, most people, when I say that, do what you just did. They laugh. They think I'm trying to make a joke. And I am not. I'm dead serious. Let me tell you why. I have observed in my reading of history a little phenomenon that exists with our species, and I call this phenomenon stupid, crazy genius. And here's how it plays out. Terry, let's say you and I grew up in this town together, and when I got out of high school, I went off to college, and I've been gone for about 20 years, and I come back for a visit. And I run into you, and I say, hey, Terry, how's everything going? And you say, fine. And we're talking for a little bit, and I say to you, how's Tom doing? And you say to me, oh, Tom. We used to think he was so smart, but I'm telling you, he's stupid. He's wasted the last year of his life over there on the hill. And are you ready for this? He thinks he's going to catch light inside a glass ball and light the world. I mean, how stupid can you be? 2 years later, I'm back in town again. I run into you, and we're talking. I say, hey, what's Tom up to? And you say to me, he's out of his mind. He's crazy. 3 years of his life now he's wasted on this stupid light the ball thing. A year later, I'm back in town, and before I even see you, I hear you yelling, hey, Pete! I turn around and say, yeah, Terry, what's up? And you say, did you hear about Tom? Tom's a genius. He caught light inside a glass ball, and he's going to light the world. All throughout our history, the first person in the group to think outside of the group thought is labeled by the rest of the people in the group as being stupid. If they persist in that activity, we then label them as being crazy. And when the rest of us catch up and realize, holy cow, this is a great idea, we then call those people geniuses. Now, don't misunderstand me. I understand very clearly that far more than 95% of the stupid, crazy people out there are, in fact, stupid and crazy, and are never going to be geniuses, okay? I understand that. But here's the problem. If we weed out all the stupid, crazy people, we're also accidentally going to get rid of the geniuses. And we don't want to do that because we still need the geniuses. So that means we got to put up with all the stupid, crazy stuff, as long as it doesn't harm other people or other people's property, because then we get the benefit of the geniuses. And that's what we have lost sight of. This is about understanding our species. This is about understanding where we come from. It's about understanding human rights. I mean, how come the government has the right to tell me what, and in some cases who, I can put in my body? I mean, I can't think of a more fundamental human right than me making that choice. But it isn't that way. It isn't that way. They have the right to tell us. And we call ourselves free. That's the amazing thing. But I do tend to go on.
What you're saying is very inspiring, and I thoroughly thank you for being here and sharing these thoughts or concepts. Yeah, it's definitely different, because when you put on the table that it's law enforcement against prohibition, you threw in gambling, you put in the drug laws, then let's talk about prostitution a little bit, right? I mean,
certainly.
When you're,
you know what I don't want to see? I don't want to see anybody 14 years old, 15 years old being forced into prostitution. I want to end that. And I know the easiest way to end that is by legalizing prostitution. Because if it's legal and it's out in the open, there's no place for 13 and 14-year-olds. It's only when it's underground in the backyard. You don't find 13 and 14-year-old prostitutes working in Nevada. Why? Because prostitution's legal and they got an age limit set. You also don't have transmission of diseases because people are checked for physical problems. I often like to tell people, I go, when I first got on the police department, I was dating this woman, and I would go over and I would pick her up at her apartment, and then I would take her out for dinner, and then we would go to a movie, and then we'd go back to her apartment, we would have sex, and then I'd go home. And then I would do that again, and I would do that again. And the fourth date we had, I arrested her. I had people say, you arrested her? What'd you arrest her for? I said, well, when I got to her apartment to take her out for dinner, she said, rather than spending that $50 on the dinner and the movie, why don't you just give me the $50 so we could have dinner here and have sex, and then you can go home? and I arrested her for being a prostitute because now she's selling sex. Now, that's a joke, obviously. That never happened. But that's the absurdity of having laws against things like that. I mean, it's just insane. And yet we do it over and over and over again. And it's because we think we know better how you should live than you do. And I don't think that's right. Because, as I said before, stupid, crazy genius, sometimes the stuff that you're doing is stuff that I'm going to want to be doing later on. Because I'm going to learn from you that it's a better thing than what I was doing before. But if you're not allowed to change, you know, it's always, and I don't want to get into politics, but the term of conservatism always drove me crazy. Because if we had been true conservatives in 1900, we'd still be riding around on horses, right? We would have conserved. Right. We would have stayed right where we were. We wouldn't have grown. We wouldn't have learned about these new things into the future. We wouldn't have expanded. We wouldn't have been progressive. We would have been conservative. Well, when it comes to money, I like to be conservative. When it likes to be social, I think we should be a little bit more progressive, you know, and we should be learning about people. And we should learn to take advantage of the geniuses amongst us that we don't even recognize. You know, and the other, I had two great parents, and I could go on, we could do 2 hours just on them. My father was a big one about honor and integrity. And one of the things that he used to say was that you decide you're going to do something before you take the man's money. And what he meant by that was once you make the agreement to do it, you can't change your mind because you promised it to another person. Now, you could have said, no, I'm not going to do that. That would have been fine. But once you make the agreement to do it, you have to do it. And then here's the other part. Not only do you have to do it, but you have to do it as good as you can. And why? Because you don't want anybody to look at that project and say, who did that garbage? It's got your name on it now. You want them to say, hey, that's great. Who did that? That was my father. My mother, she had her own definition of a fool. And my mother used to say a fool is a human being who, when meeting another human being for the first time, the fool is the one who doesn't see the mirror. In other words, my mother taught me when I saw a stranger, the first thing I should notice is my own reflection. And let me tell you something. 20 years of police work, every time I arrested somebody, I got a little flash of the mirror. And it kind of kept my feet on the ground and realized I wasn't special. You could twist fate a little bit the other way, and this could be 180 degrees around. They could be arresting me. Who knows? But that kept me kind of level. So I had a good start at going out there on life and taking a look at things. And I didn't have some superior attitude. And I looked at the benefit in other people. And I also, by the way, there's a little thing that we talk about all the time in society, and that's unselfishness. You've heard people talk about how unselfish they are. Let me tell you something. There is no such thing as an unselfish act. Every act that we take, the thing that goes through our head before we take the action is, I want to do this. And the definition of selfishness is doing I want to. I want. That's selfishness. Now, that selfishness, let's say you're standing on a street corner, and I come running up, and I push you out in the street. And by pushing you out in the street, I push you away from the truck that was going to hit you, and the truck hits me and kills me. Now, there's an unselfish act, right? I sacrificed my life for a stranger. Never met you before, didn't know you, saved your life, and gave up mine. So you go to my house to thank my family for this unselfish thing I did. And when you get to my house, you find two people, my invalid child and my invalid wife, who I am the sole supporter of. And you tell them what an unselfish thing I did. And they said, unselfish? What are you talking about? What about his responsibility to us and taking care of this family and meeting his duty? He's our only support. The only reason he did that was because, and this is actually what would have happened, at the moment that I saw you about to step in front of that truck, I had two thoughts. One was, I can stand here and do nothing and watch her get hit, or I can make an attempt to do something. Now, if I do nothing and watch her get hit, every time I close my eyes for the rest of my life, I'm going to see that image. So I choose to push you and save your life. Not because of you, but because of what I wanted. And I think that if we start understanding that about ourselves, I'll tell you, I came to that conclusion when I was probably in my late 30s. And it took a phrase out of my vocabulary that I'm sorry I ever said, and I'm glad I don't use anymore. And that phrase is, you don't appreciate all the stuff I do for you. Because I realize now that if I'm going to be honest, what I'm going to say to you is, you don't appreciate all the stuff I do for myself. And why should you? You know, I'm doing it for me. And it made me understand that a little bit more. And it honestly, in a way, it made me appreciate others more. Because I realize that when other people do something for me, they're doing that because it makes them feel good and they want to do it. And it's nice to know somebody's doing something for you because they think it's good for them. That's cool. But we like to talk about unselfishness because it makes us sound better. I just think it's absurd. But that's off topic.
You know, we've got probably, let me see, 9 more minutes of the show left. And, you know, right now there's most people associate LEAP with marijuana.
Yeah.
And we're realizing that it's a lot more than just marijuana. Do you feel that the true message of LEAP is getting a little convoluted at this point because there's such a push for associating LEAP with the marijuana legalization movement?
Well, first off, let me just be very clear for everybody listening. I hate groups. I can't stand groups because what you happen when you have groups is you start getting groupthink. And the survival of the group becomes more important than the issues that they set themselves out to do. Let me give you a little concept of group thought in our history. Back in the 1800s, a movement started in this country looking for full equality for women. Full equality for women is what the movement was about. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, two of the strongest voices in that movement moving into the 20th century, they were out speaking for full equality for women, and they were fighting for it. About 1890s, the movement got a hold of the right to vote movement for women, okay? And they got all sucked into the right to vote movement. In fact, they got so sucked into the right to vote movement that they pushed Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony out of the movement because they wouldn't stop talking about full equality for women and not just the right to vote. And when these people went to the all-male Rotary Club to try to convince those Rotarians to grant women the right to vote, one of those Rotarians would angrily stand up and say, well, you're talking about full equality for women, aren't you? And then the right to vote people would say, oh, no. We're just talking about medical marijuana. I'm sorry. We're just talking about the right to vote here. Okay? Women got the right to vote in 1920. The women's rights movement went in the toilet until about the mid-1960s. Nothing moved on women's rights. Why? Because as soon as somebody started talking about women's rights, somebody would say, well, you got the right to vote. And that was the end of the discussion. They're doing the same thing by getting sucked into the marijuana issue. I believe marijuana should be totally legal in this country. I do not believe marijuana should be legal in this country because it's medically useful. People are that. I believe it should be because I believe that heroin and methamphetamine and gambling and prostitution and all these consensual adult behaviors should be legalized in this country. As long as everybody doing it wants to do it, we may want to regulate it, but we should never prohibit it. Let me give you a little thing you might get a smile out of. Back about 8 or 9 years ago, I'm up in Vermont, and I'm doing a series of presentations at Rotary clubs. And at one of the Rotary clubs, this popped into my head, so I threw it out in front of the audience. And I said to them, this is in Vermont now, I'll tell you an insane adult activity. There are human beings, just like you and me, who when they see a tall, icy mountain, the first thought that comes into their head is, I ought to climb up on top of that mountain and tie 2 slippery boards to my feet and push myself off the edge. Now that's insane. People get injured and killed every year doing that. We should ban it. Now this is in Vermont. We should ban it. And these people are looking at me like I'm nuts. Ban ski? What, are you crazy? I said, we should ban it. And then I said, but what would happen if we banned it? Well, the people that wanted to do it would not stop doing it. But instead of doing it on groomed slopes with ski people nearby and health people nearby to help them if they have a problem, they'd just be doing it out in the woods someplace. And you know what? More of them would be injured and more of them would die. So what we do is we accept this crazy behavior, we regulate and control it, and make it as safe as possible, and let the people choose to do what they want to do. I'm a NASCAR fan. I watched Dale Earnhardt smash into a wall and die in a NASCAR race. Obviously, my choice was ban NASCAR, right? No, it's stupid. We know there's going to be more people that are going to be injured and killed, of course, but that's part of the risk that people take when they go in. Look at Muhammad Ali and his mental capabilities. That's often being hit in the head and concussion after concussion. We ought to ban boxing. But we did that once at the beginning of the 20th century. Many states banned boxing. And you know what happened? The homicide rate went up. More fighters died. Because now instead of having it in a boxing ring in the middle of town with a doctor at ringside, it was out in a barn in the country. Because it didn't stop. It just moved its location so it could hide. We have to accept this behavior in people. We have to regulate and control it to make it as safe as possible. And people should be allowed in a free society to make the choices that they choose to make.
Well, I definitely agree with you. This is a different kind of concept that many people think the way you do too as well. I mean, even, believe it or not, my mom one time said to me, and I was shocked at the time that she said it because my brain wasn't there yet totally, even though I did somewhat agree with you, but she did tell me just out of the blue, she just goes, I just think that they should legalize drugs and prostitution. She just said it.
Yeah.
And I was kind of surprised. I was like, Mom, because I thought of my mom as being maybe not as liberal as me, but I guess I was wrong on some instances, in that respect.
There's a guy by the name of Reverend Niemöller, and Reverend Niemöller was a Lutheran pastor back in the 1930s in Germany, and he made a famous quote, and that was, when they came to take the homosexuals away, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a homosexual. When they came to take the Jews away, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Jew. And when they came to take me away, there was nobody there to say anything. And that's what we should understand. If we live in a society that can do this, if Nixon could actually put in a program that would specifically go after people of color in our society and people that disagreed with him politically, then we don't have a free society. Because if he could do that to them, he can do it to you. And that's
and it is us.
Yes.
It is us. At this point, it is us because, we could always say, well, it's the black people or it was the hippies. And I full on agree. I know I've always felt that during the Nixon administration, when even look at marijuana, it's a class 1 drug because the very people that were speaking out against the Vietnam War and causing the anti-war revolution were also smoking marijuana. I mean, to think that there's not a correlation between those, that is not really looking at what happened back then. And you can look down, from the beginning, even look at marijuana. They did it to get rid of the Mexicans.
Of course.
They used black jazz musicians to be an unfavorable reason. Your white women are smoking marijuana and having sex with your black jazz. I mean, all of that stuff. And let's look at the crack cocaine and Freeway Ricky Ross and all that kind of stuff that happened. What they did to the South, the inner cities here in Los Angeles, and how they tried to get rid of them, to attack them, basically.
Yep.
And so it's been done. It's been done, and it continues to be done. Meanwhile, our prison system gets rich. Go ahead.
I just want to throw one last thing in real quick. We have in the United States of America the largest prison population on the planet Earth. We lock up a greater percentage of our society than any other society on Earth. And I would like to point out that we have one of the most efficient prison systems on Earth, because you hardly ever hear of anybody escaping from our prison. But out of that huge, efficient prison system, do you have any idea how many drug-free prisons we have?
Probably zero.
Exactly zero. And I want everybody, when they drive by that sign in front of the school that says drug-free school, to remember that we don't have one drug-free prison in America, and you're supposed to believe that school is drug-free? No.
Well, I definitely want to thank you so much for being on the show today. It was a wonderful show, Peter, and best wishes to you and to Leap as well. This is the Freedom of Joyce Show. I am Terry Joyce, your host. I'll be back next week. Have a great weekend.